The last time we were looking at Genesis, we were looking at the story of Melchizedek. And one of the things we were seeing in that story was how the king of Sodom had rebelled a number of times and had been defeated a number of times. Abraham, or Abram as he was still called at that time, was extremely nervous about allowing the king of Sodom to have any impact in his life. Didn't want to receive anything at the hand of the king of Sodom, and really kind of turned his back on him and concentrated on this character Melchizedek who appeared. And this morning we're going to follow on from looking at Sodom. And there's some stuff in today's message which is really quite disturbing, because we're going to be looking at what happened there and comparing that a little to what's going on today. And so starting in Genesis 18, we begin by seeing these three men approach Abram. And what is interesting is that there was a movie a few years ago, some years ago now, called The Bible. And in this particular scene, I found it quite interesting that all three angels who appeared at this point in the movie were all played by Peter O'Toole, all three of them. He played all three parts. And I thought that was interesting, and I've always believed that this was probably one of the most powerful theophanies of the Old Testament. I've often believed, and actually there are many scholars who also believe, that this actually was a manifestation of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit manifesting themselves in human form as they come and speak with Abram. And what happens in the sequence is quite interesting as we go through the passage. And what I'm actually putting up on screen is from the King James Version, and there's a particular reason why I'm doing that, which I'll explain as we go through it. But what we see is, throughout the passage, there is a shift back and forth when referring to these three men, from the singular to the plural, to the singular to the plural. So in the first verse, it's in the singular. And the Lord appeared unto him, that's Abram, in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day. And then in verse 2, it shifts from that singular into the plural. And he lifted up his eyes, and he looked, and lo, three men stood by him. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door, and bowed himself toward the ground. You know, when he's bowing towards the ground like that, he's worshipping. You will see other references to bowing to somebody, but that's just a courtesy bow. When it says bowed towards the ground, it means going right down on the knees before the person. Bowed himself towards the ground. And then it shifts to the singular again. And he said, "My Lord, if I have now found favour in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant." One of the things that we've lost from the English language is the use of the word thou, thy, thee. And there is actually a difference between thou, the word thou, and the word you. The word thou is a singular. It's addressed to a singular. You only say that to one person. It's a singular address. But when you say you, that is a plural. So when the King James was written, thou was singular, you was always plural. It's very interesting that in John 3:16, we see that the the promise is to you. Although Jesus is speaking to Nicodemus, an individual, actually, Jesus' words are addressed to everybody. There's only two people there. But if you actually look both in the Greek is addressed in the plural as well as in the Old English. And so this verse 3 here, is all in the singular. Then it shifts to plural again. So he's still talking to the three men, but now he says, "Let I pray you be fetched and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree." So he shifted from addressing them in the singular to addressing them in the plural. "And I'll fetch a morsel of bread and comfort ye your hearts, that ye shall pass on. For therefore are ye come to your servant. And they said, so do, as you have said." So it shifted into this plural. "And Abram hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, Make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal," note 3 here, "knead it and make cakes on the hearth." And then he ran into the herd and fetched a calf, tender and good, and gave it to a young man, and he hasted to dress it. And then he took butter and milk and the calf which he dressed, and he set it before them, plural, as he stood by them under the tree. And they ate. And they said to him, so this conversation starts, "And they said to him, Where is Sarah thy wife?" And he said, "Behold, in the tent." And then it shifts back to the singular again. "And he said, I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life. And lo, Sarah your wife shall have a son." And Sarah heard it in the tent door which was behind him. And Sarah and Abraham were old and well stricken in age, and it ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. And therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, "After I'm waxed old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also?" And then still in the singular, "And the Lord said to Abraham, Wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I of a surety bear a child when I'm old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the time appointed I will return to thee, according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son." And Sarah denied, saying, "I laughed not," for she was afraid. And he said, "No, but you did laugh." And then it shifts into the plural again. "And the men rose up from there and looked towards Sodom. And Abraham went with them to bring them on the way." Then it shifts to the singular again. "And the Lord said, Shall I hide from Abraham that which I do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him." Here's this repeat of an earlier blessing we had seen. And then again in the singular, "For I know him that he will command the children and his household after him. They shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken of him." And the Lord said, "Because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which is come unto me, and if not, I will know." The Lord is saying, I am going to go down to Sodom. I'm going to go there. And then we shift to the plural again. "And the men turned their faces from there and went towards Sodom. But Abraham stood yet before the Lord," singular. So there is this jumping back and forth from plural to singular, from plural to singular. And we're seeing the addressing of them, both, we see them saying something, and then it says he said, or he said to him. And it's going back and forth. And then we get to the point in this movie where one of the three angels stays behind to have a conversation with Abraham. And the other angels move off and head down towards Sodom. So we have this situation where God, the Lord, Yahweh, it says Yahweh was going to go down to Sodom to see them. And we see two men going off. But it also says Yahweh stayed and spoke with Abraham. So there's a split here. Yahweh is used for both the ones who are going to Sodom and for the one who is staying behind and continuing a conversation with Abraham. And what we see here, if you remember when I was talking about theophanies, I said one of the characteristics of a theophany is that very often food is involved. There is an eating of food together in a theophany. So God's presence comes in and he manifests himself in some way and food is eaten, just as we saw with Melchizedek, food was eaten. Just as we see later when the 70 elders go with Moses up Mount Sinai, and it says that they saw his feet standing on the pavement and they ate before the Lord. So there is this idea of eating in the presence of God when he is with you. And to a certain degree, when we break bread in the communion, we're inviting the Lord to come in with us. There is something very special about communion because it's represented in the tabernacle as being a table with bread and wine on it. And we know that the veil is torn, with the Holy of Holies, where God himself is exposed to that table. And we now, under this new priesthood, can come in and take that bread and wine in the very presence of God under this new priesthood. And so this idea of eating in the presence of God continues even today into our communion service. And we see also this promise being reinforced to Abraham yet again, that he will be a great nation, that he will bless the other nations. It's repeated again here. Abraham becomes concerned because God is talking about going down and bringing wrath onto Sodom. And it says that Abraham drew near. He's drawing near to this angel who is representative of the Lord. And Abraham asks this question: will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? And Abraham begins to plead on behalf of the whole of Sodom. He's not saying, will you just save 50? If you look at what it's actually saying, suppose there are 50 righteous men within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 who are in it? He's not just asking for the 50. He's asking for the whole city. He's saying, if there are 50 there, will you save the city? He almost chides with God here. Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? We see something like this again later with Moses when he comes down from Sinai. God has declared that he's going to destroy them all. He said, I'm going to destroy them all. I'll raise up a new nation to you, Moses. A great honor about to be placed on Moses. But Moses rejects that and says no. He recognizes that God is bigger than this. So God says, if I find 50 righteous in the city, I will spare, notice, the whole place for their sake. But Abraham thinks, I guess maybe he was thinking that was answered a bit too easily. Maybe I should have asked for more. And so, behold, I've undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. He recognizes who he is before God. But then he says, if the 50 are short by 5, will you still destroy the whole city for a lack of 5? And God says, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. And again he spoke to him and said, suppose 40 are found there. And God answered, for the sake of 40 I will not do it. And then Abraham says again, oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there. And God answers, I will not do it if I find 30. Behold, I've undertaken to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. And God answers, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. And then he says again, oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again but this once. Suppose 10 are found there. And he answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And it says the Lord went his way. I get the sense that God was not prepared to go lower than 10. Because he says, for the sake of 10, I will not do it. And the Lord went his way. And when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place, in the end, only 4 were found righteous and taken out of the city. And then as we move into the next chapter, we find that the 2 angels have moved on down into Sodom. And so we move from this wonderful part of this whole story about how these angels have revealed themselves to Abraham. They have renewed the promise yet again. How, they've spoken good things and blessing. How they have listened to Abraham and have modified and muted potentially the wrath that they would bring. But in the end, only 4 were found, we discover. And we find that the men have become conscious, the men of the city have become conscious of the fact that these angels have arrived there. And look what it says in verse 4. But before the angels had lain down to go to sleep there, it says, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, all of the men, every single one in the city, surrounded the house. Every single one, to the last man, it says. And they called out to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may know them. The LGBT community and the so-called churches which embrace homosexuality, they suggest, well, this word "know" literally is a word that means we just want to get to know them. We just want to be friends with them. We just want to find out a bit more about them. And that's all of the intent. But hang on a minute, God has come there in order to deal with them for their wickedness. And it's quite evident that the meaning of "know" here is not just we just want to be chums, we just want to be friends with them. Because what is Lot's response? His response is, I beg you, brothers, it's men who have surrounded this house, do not act so wickedly. He understands completely that the intention is not simply to be friends with these guys, to be chums with them, to find out a bit more about them because they're just simply interested. No, There is a wickedness here, and Lot recognises that. The whole house is besieged. All the men of the city are around. Sometimes we miss that particular point when we go through this story, partly because we don't like the story. But we miss this fact. It wasn't just a group of men. It was all of them. This is why God was going to destroy this place. Something had gone seriously wrong in this place, and God was not going to tolerate it. And then this next thing that happens is something that disturbs a lot of people. This idea that Lot would then offer his 2 daughters. I think Lot recognises that the 2 men are actually more than just two men that have come into his house, that there's something very special about them, and he must do absolutely everything to protect them. Not that he really needs to. He hasn't yet fully understood the full power that there is there. But I think in his mind he thinks this is the lesser of the wickedness. This is the letter. I don't think he was offering this in any way lightly, but it was the lesser choice. It was the lesser evil. Let me bring them out to you and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they've come under the shelter of my roof. And you know, what he's just said is not offensive to those men. It's difficult to see an insult to them in here. But they take it as an insult. They say, stand back. This fellow came to sojourn with us. This fellow has come to travel with us, has come to join us, and he's become a judge of us. Now we will deal worse with Lot than with these men that they wanted to know. They turn their attention on him. And it says actually that the angels, the men, grabbed Lot and pulled him back into the house and closed the door. And the men are still clamouring outside. And the men were struck with blindness who were at the entrance of the house. I note here that it's just the men who were at the entrance of the house, it says, were struck blind, both small and great. But they were still insisting on trying to get to the men inside the household. The lust was so great. They were now blind, and it says they wore themselves out, groping for the door. What had happened in this city? Something had happened where the evil that had entered into that city had grown to such an extent that for them, the inordinate sexual perversion in that city had become normal. It had become normalized. Satan wants to try and bring things hideous in and wants to try and normalize that evil and that hideousness. And interestingly enough, I was kind of thinking, what can illustrate just how bad things are at this time? I was kind of wondering whether there was anything around, and I hadn't asked for this. Jessica just sort of said, whoa, I've just come across this. Look at this. This is really quite hideous. This is Celine Dion, pop singer, who has just launched a range, or relatively recently has launched a range of gender-neutral clothing for children. What is interesting is that I did some further research and discovered this woman is as thick as 2 short planks. They get her onto chat shows, and they try and get her onto any kind of subject of intellect, and they try and discuss politics with her, and she just kind of like, don't know. She knows nothing. I mean, she knows something about music, and beyond that, this is a woman who is career-driven, and I think she's ended up by being a pawn in all of this, but has become a pawn. Some evil influence has come in order to take her and use her name for evil intent. And so there is a promotional video about launching these gender-neutral clothing, and it is satanic. And we're not just talking iffy, perhaps, maybe. We're talking seriously satanic. I mean, just look at this for a minute. In the video, she walks into this nursery. You have all the male children on one side in the blue, with the male symbol on the wall. You have all the female children on the other side, with the female symbol on the wall. And she then takes out this mysterious little box, black box, and opens it. And inside, there are these little black flakes. And she blows them into the room. And as the flakes start to move all over the room, everything changes and transforms to that. All the babies dressed in black and white. The gender symbols have gone, replaced with this plus sign. But horrifically, look at these dolls that are in some of the cots. Clearly demonic. And all the children are dressed, all the colour, actually, there is no colour in her range of clothes at all. She talks about the new order. We've heard it before, this new world order. And we see close-ups of some of the babies in the clothing that she's endorsing, and we see a baby dressed like this. We see the pentagram on there. Now, something I should just say about the pentagram before we move on with this, and that is that the pentagram was originally found, the earliest findings of the pentagram is on pottery that comes from around 3500 BC in ancient Mesopotamia. But then a little later, it was actually adopted by the Hebrew people. It was adopted to symbolize truth. The pentagon also represented the first 5 books of the Pentateuch. It was known as the Seal of Solomon. And the pentagrams have been found pressed into jar handles with the Hebrew letters for Jerusalem between the points of the pentagram. Originally, the pentagram was innocent and was actually used in and has also been found archaeologically in some ancient ruins, Hebrew and Jewish ruins. But what then happened was that it began to be appropriated by Satan. It was appropriated by the Hindus, by the Celtic Druids, in Gnosticism. There was the symbol of the goat's head known as the Baphomet, which is familiar in satanical stuff. It became involved in Wicca, in witchcraft, and with the Church of Satan more recently. And the thing is that it's turned upside down. It's turned upside down. And this is another thing that Satan does. He takes a symbol that's used originally for good and he turns it upside down. Just as the cross has been taken into Satanism and has been turned upside down. And then the Baphomet is this goat's head image where the horns, the ears, and the beard fit into the spokes. And so although the pentagram had been used quite a lot in Hebrew culture, in 1897, when the first Zionist Congress met, they decided that it was not appropriate to use the 5-pointed star anymore. And so the decision was made to have a 6-pointed star, which they then called the Star of David. But you know, even now, what has happened is that elements of Satanism have also tried to appropriate the 6-pointed star. And so there are parts of satanic cults today who now are starting to use the 6-pointed star as well as part of their rituals. They want to corrupt everything. But let's go back to this range of clothing to look at this a little bit more. There is this all-seeing eye, which is a satanic influence, placed all over her clothing there. Then we have this. This is all on their website. These are all images off of their website. This is how they're promoting it. There is one that I haven't put on here, which just shows a whole load of kids with just black and white stripes, but they've had shaven heads, and they look like prisoners. This next one, this is also on their website. And you have Kim Kardashian there showing off with her child one of the items of clothing that are being sold. But this all gets worse, because all of this is very tightly linked with paedophilia. This is still coming off of their website. A little girl's bathing costume with the black mark of an adult hand on her chest. 2 little girls under a sign saying, "Let's get physical." Images using a lot of spirals, and children in spirals, and the spiral is a symbol used by paedophiles, which is a symbol for little boy lover. So the symbol wasn't on, the right-hand symbol wasn't on her website, but this is where the spirals that she's using in some of the clothing is indicative of this link with pedophilia. Look at this one. Where's the clothing here that she's selling? The pedophilia idea here is very strong. Quite sick. A little girl with a shirt with the word hoe on it. Hoe is an abbreviation used in parts of America for whore. And the shock is that there is an attempt to kind of normalize pedophilia by declaring that pedophilia is a natural sexual orientation, just like heterosexuality. There is a move out there to not prosecute a pedophile because they're just doing what comes naturally. Children are the target of Satan. We've seen this week in the news that children are being used as young as 10 years old as mules to carry drugs for drug gangs in this country. Families are threatened by gangs who threaten other members of the family that they will kill them if they stop or try and stop their children from doing this. And in the documentary this week, there was a mother who actually is stopping her child doing it by actually carrying the drugs on behalf of the child to deliver them. Satan is after our children at the moment. Satan wants to normalize evil. He's won part of a battle by getting our government to change the law with regards to same-sex marriage. He's won that battle. So many people in this country now think that homosexuality is something normal. There are churches in this country who are supporting that idea, who are attempting to teach that what has been taught in the past about homosexuality is wrong, and are trying to redefine things. They're trying to suggest that the only time that God is speaking against homosexuality is not about homosexuality itself, but against lustful behaviour. So when they look at the story like we're looking at this morning in Sodom and Gomorrah, what we're seeing is that they're suggesting that it's not the homosexuality that was the issue, it was the excessive lust that was the issue. But what they're teaching is wrong. You go back to the book of Leviticus and you find that there is a whole chapter which is talking about sexual deviancy. There's a whole list of descriptions of what is not acceptable. It is not acceptable to have sex with your mother. It is not acceptable to have sex with your sister. It is not acceptable to have sex with an animal. It is not acceptable for a man to have sex with another man in the same way that he would with a woman. That is not acceptable. In that chapter, there is no mention of lust. There is no mention of excess. It is simply a list of unacceptable sexual liaisons. And the command clearly in Leviticus is, a man shall not lie with another man as he would with a woman. Not acceptable. Scripture is absolutely clear on this. We have parts of our church who are trying to teach, influenced by Satan, that some of this stuff is normal and acceptable, and it is not. These are signs of the end times. Just as God reached a point with Sodom where he said, I have had enough. I am going to end it. He will do that again with the whole world. So let's move on to the positive side again. What does this story tell us? It's actually another type. It's a type for the end of the world. The Lord, yes, has stayed with Abraham and spoken to him, but the Lord also has gone to Sodom. The two angels represent the Lord. And I believe one of them, because one of them is more active than the other in physical action, because it says one of them reached out and grabbed Lot and pulled him into the house. They said, is there anybody else who should come with you? And so initially, Lot went out to go and find the two men who were betrothed to his daughters. And it says he lingered. I think he was taking some time. He was having some trouble persuading them. Step back a little bit. What did it tell us? Every man in the city, to the last man, they were among them. And while Lot was trying to persuade them to leave this place, the angel reached that point where it says he grabbed him. He grabbed Lot and took him out. And in haste led them out of Sodom. I believe that angel was Jesus. He had come to the place where the sin was in order to rescue his people and took them out of there. It's a symbol of rapture. It's a symbol of his rescue of them. It's a symbol of Jesus saving his people. The idea that the rapture is not going to happen because there's no precedent in Scripture. Well, we've seen two now. We've seen Noah. We've just seen Lot. And in that we see a promise. Jesus is coming. He's going to rescue his people. He's going to sort it out.